All right, and we are live. So this is fun. Had some issues there, a little housekeeping in the past few weeks. Had some issues with getting this up, but it looks like things good. Looks like I am streaming at a decent bandwidth. So tonight I am hosting Last Homely House. Go ahead, introduce yourself and tell us what is it we're getting into and what we should know about you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my X handle is Last Homely House. My name's Joel Trumbo. I'm a Virginian, old stock Virginian, and I live up in the mountains of Virginia and military veteran. But what I do now, mostly, I have 9 kids, and we homeschool them. We have a little forest school at our house, so we have some other families who come out and kind of share some of our school week with us. So I do a lot of. I was a teacher for 6 years, so I do a lot of teaching. I do homeschooling, and I do book arts. So essentially, I do a little bit of publishing, but it's a lot of in the tradition of the private press type stuff you see from the 19th century with Kelmscott and things like that. It's sort of a neo-medievalist revival of illuminated manuscripts and just sort of traditional art forms, calligraphy and traditional art forms in books.
Yeah, awesome. So before we get into anything, how in the world do you pull off having 9 kids these days? How did you find a lady that was ready to go down that road?
Well, I was very fortunate. I married my high school sweetheart. You could call it that, I suppose. I've known her pretty much my whole life. We grew up in the same church together since like third grade. So we've known each other forever, and we were best friends in high school. And we got married super young. And she grew up in a big family. I grew up in a big family. We both wanted a big family. We wanted to homeschool. We were both homeschooled. So, it just all sort of aligned for me. Honestly, uh, I didn't I didn't do much to make it happen. It was mostly just providence, I think.
Yeah, well, amen to that. All right, good. So I would. There's a couple different routes we can go with you, and I wanted to start out with just what if you go to his ex, you guys are going to see a lot of. Uh, and correct me where I'm wrong. Illuminations is primarily rather than illustrations, is is the proper nomenclature. Yes.
More or less, yeah. Illumination is
Okay.
more the style. I mean, it is.
Okay.
I'm using modern printing technology, so it is essentially just illustrated stuff. But I do all the illustrations are hand done, and they're done in a particular style. And with the originals, I use gold and things like that of that sort. Sometimes I use more traditional pigments and even calfskin. Illumination is really more the style than if you're what I'm actually publishing most of the time. It's really basically just illustrations.
Yeah, absolutely. So where does all this come from? You're at this point you're post military. You've got your family. You said you were into teaching there for a minute. What what sort of sent you down this road? Um, and describe. I'm doing a really poor job of describing what it is you do, but that's because it's multifaceted, and sort of how I titled this was rest and inspiration. And so what pushed you in the direction you're going with the arts and then with the things that you produce?
Um, I suppose it would be essentially just sort of a lifelong nerd streak. Like I said, I come from a big family, but both my parents were educators. My dad taught at a private school, and my mom homeschooled myself and my sisters. And so I grew up in a household that was like a very classical education. I was exposed to a lot of things, a lot of good literature, a lot of history and arts, and I always had a very deep kind of nerdy things. I was like from a young age very inspired when we were learning about the did and the the art from especially the migration age, sort of post Roman Empire migration age art in the Germanic countries and then the Celtic countries that in particular really grabbed my attention. So it's partly cultural, it's I'm primarily German and Scottish ancestry myself. So it really captivating to me from a young age. And so I always wanted to do something as a kid. I would practice, trying to illuminate things. I like that art form in particular. And so it's something when I was in the military, when I was deployed, I would sketch and draw like book art stuff, in my hooch overseas. And so it's just something I always did for fun. I got into it more along the lines of what I'm doing now because a little bit of backstory. After I got out of the military, I did a number of things. I built a tiny house, and when I got out, like on a trailer. And so my wife, we had 5 kids at the time in this trailer house I built for the first year after I got out. And I just wanted to try. Actually wanted to live in a teepee and go full nomad. And I pitched that to her, and she didn't like the idea. But she did accommodate. She's like, we can come to some kind of agreement. So we'll do a tiny house, and as long as it's a hard structure, that'll work. So we did that for a little while, and I tried a couple other things. I ended up working overseas for a number of years contracting. I basically did like close protection for the State Department at a couple of embassies in Iraq and then later in Africa. So I was making pretty good money doing that, supporting my family. But we were homeschooling our kids, and I wanted to do as much of that as I could. But of course, I'm gone like 9 months out of the year overseas. So I was writing lessons and stuff while I was overseas, and
Well, that was
doing
also,
Skype
I mean,
sessions.
the PSD sessions during that were no joke. And so the operating
Yeah,
tempo was kind of high. So, yeah,
it was. Yeah, there's always been a lot
yeah,
going on, for sure. But I was trying to do that stuff as best I could from overseas. Obviously, it wasn't ideal, and I wasn't very happy with it. But so when we moved to the Shenandoah Valley, where we live now, it was about 8 years ago. There's a really cool, a really neat little private Catholic school nearby, and it was sort of Montessori younger ages, and then classical, but older. It's in the mountains. There's a lot of outdoor stuff. It was really right up the alley of kind of what we were trying to do and what we wanted.
yeah.
So I put my older kids in for the first year. And they really liked it. It was a really good fit for us. And then they had their teacher ended up leaving, and they needed a new one. And I had wanted to teach for a while anyway, and just hadn't really figured out how to as a homeschool dad, in Africa.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that position came up, and I applied. Let me give it a try. And so I ended up teaching there. So I became so I got to teach my own kids. I had them in my class, which was really cool. But the pay cut, as you can imagine, going from PSD contracting to teaching at like
It's like a
a
quarter of
40
it,
person,
if that.
it was not even a quarter
Yeah,
of it. It was,
yeah.
but my paycheck basic, because we about I have 40 acres, and so
Okay.
like
Yeah.
my paycheck didn't even all the way cover my mortgage payment.
Yep.
And so it was kind of an act of faith. I wanted to do that, but I was like this looks really impractical and crazy. I have no idea how I'm
Yeah.
going to do this. So I prayed about it a lot and just sort of and decided like I'm just going to send it and see where it goes. But I had to figure out how to do some stuff on the side. So I actually
Yes.
started do what I was doing as a hobby all these years. It was bookbinding primarily at the time, but making this kind of
Wow.
style art and bookbinding. And then I just tried to see if I could sell it and to kind of offset and make ends meet, which I did sort of barely for a couple years. Like it was really
Yep.
just squeaking by. It's taken a long time. It's been a lot of work, but it's now getting to where like I'm effectively kind of self-employed now with that, and um, and so that's how I got on as a business, not just a hobby.
Yeah.
It was by necessity, but it was kind of forced me to push it in a direction I kind of wanted to go in anyway, and just wasn't really sure how to go about doing it. So, in good infantry fashion, I just tried to figure it out as I went.
Yeah. 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 Very good. Hey, so you sort of a an off ramp for just a second on the 40 acres. Did you guys jump into that and do the? Did you try to do more than the whole homesteading thing, or are you have you been able to get the farm to pay for itself? Because that's no joke. That is a it's either a labor of love and funding, or it's or boy, it can be a full time job in and of itself.
Yeah. No, we haven't really done anything significant for profit as far
Yeah.
as the homestead goes. So we have chickens, we produce our own eggs. We have a handful of goats that my oldest son takes care of.
Okay.
Um, and they're mostly for clearing though. We don't even use them for dairy at the moment.
Okay.
So
Yep.
we just kind of move them around through the woodlands and try and clear the
Yeah.
undergrowth. So yeah, we haven't really done much in that regard. It's been mostly just, but we have wanted to use the land itself, but I haven't had the time or the resources to put into really getting into the farming. So for that reason, we're doing more now, like with the forest school, basically bringing other people here and using the natural setting. It's really incredible.
Yes.
There's creeks and mountains and little ravines and stuff. So we basically are trying to use it to just bring other families and other kids out here and let them be in nature
Yeah.
and have some of their learning, their pedagogical process and familiarity coming in that natural setting, which is in my mind like that's not just ideal, but almost really kind of necessary for a healthy young person's development. So
Yeah.
that's how
This is
we're decided to
awesome.
use it.
It's taken this a place I didn't know we were going to go, but I love it. That idea of taking education and making it. Actually, let me step back from education and say taking giving a young person responsibility and making it more than education, making it kinesthetic, making it something that they can involve themselves in
Right.
is a blessing that I'm not sure most parents are even able to get a hold of, let alone comprehend.
Right.
And so that's awesome.
Well, I mean, platonically speaking here, education is really, it is a self-directed process.
Okay.
So, you know what I mean? Like, and it
Yeah.
comes, you have to be the one doing it. So an
Yeah.
educator is not the one giving you something. They're the one like helping you along the way.
Hmm.
They're like facilitating and giving you opportunities. And so starting them really young with a degree of intrepidity and an agency, and helping
Yes.
them develop just basic investment and capacity for these kinds of things, to realize
Yeah.
that there's so much to learn always and everywhere in anything they're doing, and you don't really have to go anywhere to do it. It's right here. you know
Yes.
you look outside and there's a lot of stuff to learn right there. And so if you just put yourself in it and you kind of are accustomed to approaching reality in that way, in the way to be led and to be grown, then that's how education actually happens. That's how you're going to learn and grow. you know
Okay. Fantastic. Because I believe, and again, correct me where I'm wrong, but I believe I've seen at least one of your kids within your account either promoting things they've done or you were promoting things that your kids have done. Does that sound right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking it was. it might have even been a small business, but then I think one of your boys was also making swords at one point and
Hmm.
just
Yeah,
taking it.
they're very entrepreneurial. The older ones are.
Okay.
I did make a post a few weeks ago because it was really funny. So we have a couple neighbors around us buy eggs from us from my
Yes.
son. So my middle son is in charge of the chickens, of kind of overseeing the feeding and care of the chickens and
Yeah.
collecting the eggs. And so we worked it out with him. We were like, here's how much we need, kind of basically for our family, and anything extra from that, since you're doing the work, that can be yours, and you can sell it or do whatever you want
Yes.
with it. So he got really into that, and for like
Yeah.
a week he was diligently collecting and everything, and he went and talked to our neighbors, and they agreed to buy eggs from him regularly. So he was delivering them, and that was like the first time he'd actually gotten money, like
Yes.
money that he made, and so he was super pumped about it. It took him like less than a week to figure out. He's like, man, I just made like $5 from that dozen eggs, and I'm gonna get another dozen extra tomorrow. And he's
Yeah.
like, this is sweet. And then, but he's got a 5-year-old brother who's super pumped. He's just like energy and excitement, like, what are we doing? Like, what can I do? Let's do everything's awesome. And so he the 5-year-old, he's like, can I feed the chickens? He's like, yeah, you can feed the chickens. Can I collect the eggs? He's like, yeah. He's like, I tell you what, if you feed the chickens and water them and collect the eggs, bring them to me. I'll pay you $1 for every day.
Yes.
And the 5-year-old's like, yes. So he's pumped. So he basically figured out capitalism within like 5 days of his own egg thing, because he now got his little brother doing all the labor, and he's just getting the profits from it
Yes.
and paying him like $1 a week, and the 5-year-old's like,
Okay.
sweet, making money. So
Yeah.
yeah, those things kind of how they happen naturally is
Yeah.
really delightful and humorous.
Well, there is, the within educational theory, the big standard has always been reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of the mind that if you can get those three accomplished by other means, that's that's the way it should be done. And so, because the reading is just the absorption of information, the writing is just the ability to communicate, and the arithmetic is the logic to make sure that everything stays sound. And boy, if you can achieve that by interacting with rocks or building a business or whatever, that's so much better than doing something that's rote in that you're unable to apply abstractly. And kids aren't going to apply abstractly. It's too much for them. And
Right.
so allow them to do something and to pick up the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic without even realizing they're doing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're describing basically the classical trivium right
Right.
there, and it's classical because it's natural. It follows
Hmm.
absolutely naturally and almost automatically. If there's just a little bit of structure and kind of impetus given, that's actually how it does work out. So
Yeah.
you don't need to manhandle the system. It works pretty well.
Yeah. And agency it's a beautiful thing in operation, but it's also a thing that's, I think, is surprisingly easy to squash.
Mm,
It, uh, when there is, and I think it's almost less about responsibility to some degree than it is reward. If you can, uh, not that you're rewarding a person or in particular a child because they're operating with agency, but when they know that by making their choices, they have a sense of reward in what they're doing because they get to pursue what they want. That
right.
makes sense that would be the absolute best way for them to interact.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I mean that's just psychology. Psychology
mhm.
works. It works that
Yeah.
way, and so that's what I was saying with educators being facilitators. You have an investment into how psychology works and some measure of understanding in how it works with young people,
Yeah.
what is going to be satisfying to them actually, and like where that point of satisfaction lies, because often that point of satisfaction lies a little bit further than the child might be willing to go initially on their own. If
Hmm.
there's something arduous, or you need to get through it a little bit to get the psychological
Yes.
satisfaction of accomplishment, they do need a little bit of push there, but really, primarily, what you're doing is setting the conditions. You're setting the environment
Yeah.
and just providing that structure and impetus. But all that is, like I said, it's self-directed. It's going to run
Yeah.
itself, and they're going to habituate themselves and learn. That's what they're learning is how reality works, because they're like,
Yes.
oh, if I make a good plan that's reasonable and I cover all my bases, and then I put in my labor, and then I execute, and then there's a reward, and I like the reward, and I can do that
Yes.
again, and I can iterate it, and I can make a little adaptation, and that will make it work better, and they just
Yeah.
that's how they do it.
And one of the big things too, in my mind, when they when they realize that the risk is allowed,
Mm-hmm.
potentially allowed. Well, oh, can I do this? Yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but what about? Well, no. Within this environment, within this context, you can operate in this manner. You can use this to achieve your goals, and that's fine.
Yep.
And so whether that's well, one that might get me in trouble with YouTube, we'll see. But an easy one is if you want to learn to hunt, you have to learn how to properly handle firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, well, can I touch a gun? Well, let's do things properly and
Mm-hmm.
let's make sure this happens and
Right.
happens well. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, that's the great thing about outdoors and nature. That's why we do nature school. Or
Yeah.
one reason for it is because all those lessons are built in just
Okay.
being in the environment. So
Yes.
when you're outside, there's always some inherent risk, but it's,
Yes.
within a controlled environment, it's very low grade inherent risk. So the risk
Yep.
might be that you're trying to climb up onto the treehouse platform and you fall, or you like, you know, you lose your balance going across the log and you fall in the creek and now your feet are wet and you're cold.
Yeah.
So there's nothing catastrophic, but that's always there.
Hmm.
And those kinds of things aren't really there if you're just sitting in a desk in a classroom.
Yes.
And so when you can bring lessons and the pedagogical activities into that context, that is natural because nature works like that, where they are going to have to assume some measure of risk, and it's controlled. It's not excessive, but it is there. And,
Yeah.
they interact with it. And they also learn through that process when it does happen that it's most of the time it's actually not a big deal.
Yes.
Like, oh,
Yep.
I tripped and that sucked for like 2 minutes. Now I'm cool.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
so
a
they stop being scared of it.
yeah. And
And
we go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, one more. That's a big thing with the learning process because
Right.
failure is that fear for a lot of people.
Yes.
Like if I'm afraid of failing, failing sucks, and so they don't want to try stuff because they're afraid of failure. But when you learn naturally from nature, you realize that failure is the learning process, and
Yeah.
you're kind of expected to fail. You're definitely expected to fail the first time you try it. No one's expecting you to do it to like land it on try number one, maybe not even try number two. So that you have a realism to reality where failure, you're not afraid of failure in a debilitating way,
Yep.
but you're like keyed in on it because now you're looking at failure kind of tactically. Like I'm
Oh
looking
yeah.
for the lessons here. The lessons are going to hit me. I'm ready for them when they come. There it is. And so then you just
Yeah.
take that failure, process it, and like, okay, now I got this thing. I'm ready to go. And you can see like 5-year-olds doing this outside, trying to figure out how to like climb a rope ladder. You know,
Right.
like
Yep.
that process happens continuously, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've been talking about kids, but I'm thinking this is wonderfully applied. Well, the right staff NCOs, the right officers, the right senior leadership is going to intentionally be applying the same idea to the non-rates, to the junior grades, to start seeing who can step into leadership and who can fail and keep going.
Right.
The big thing is to take a team leader, throw him up in the squad leader position, let him run a patrol, see how it goes. And most guys, say 8 out of 10 guys that get that opportunity, they're going to light up and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to do it. And then uh, whether it's in a training scenario, whether it's in a deployment scenario, then take the guys that fail and see how they react to that failure, and that's when you really start seeing guys either come into their own or sort of start shrinking back, and it's like
Right.
maybe that promise we thought we saw isn't quite there. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it can feed on itself too. You get in that cycle of failure
yeah,
and end up
yeah,
self-defeating. Yeah.
yeah. I know one of the big
No.
things I always like telling guys is like when you've skylined, when that light is on you, don't try and get out of it. Just wait
Yep.
for it to move to somebody else. It'll move eventually. Somebody else
Yeah.
screws up. So just keep your head down and keep going.
Yeah. No, I love that. And honestly, that's I am so appreciative of the experiences I had in the military. I'm going to go a little bit into my
Yeah,
backstory because I
please.
had a weird one. So I started out in the Navy. I enlisted in
Okay.
the Navy when I was
Yes.
17,
Okay.
and because the whole time I was a teenager, I was obsessed with being a Navy SEAL. Go figure. That's a classic story. But I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, so I like prepped and trained the whole time
Mm,
I was in high school. Very
yeah.
focused. Graduated high school early. Got good marks and everything. My parents super wanted me to go to the Naval Academy and go to college. I was like, nope, I'm going to war. So I enlisted when I was 17, and I went to
Oh,
Buds.
you
I
had to
actually
get their
classed
permission.
up. Yeah, I had to
Yeah.
get parental permission because I was a minor. But so I was the youngest guy in my buds class. I classed up in
Okay.
247 in back in 2003, and we started in doc I think 9 or 10 days after my 18th birthday. So I was the youngest guy in my buds class, and I had well, I would say for the most part, I had an absolute
Right.
blast there because I was living my dream. It's not to say it didn't
Yeah.
royally suck. It
Yeah.
sucked really bad, and it was pretty miserable. But I was like loving it because I was doing the thing. So
Yes.
there was a summer class though, and I ended
Oh
up
man.
getting pneumonia.
Is it
Oddly enough,
Coronado?
yeah,
Is it
I
okay?
got
Yeah.
I got pneumonia in the water. And then, like an idiot, I didn't go to medical. I was like, oh, it's probably just
Yep.
it's like a fever or something, hydrate and
Yep.
keep going. So I ended up having like a catastrophic heat stroke on one of the 4 mile timed runs in first phase. And so my core temp was like 107 and a half, and I ended up being in the hospital for a week in
That's brain
Coronado.
frying
It
temperature.
was, yeah, I had a little brain damage from that. I had a lot of like organ problems and stuff. So
Okay.
it pretty well wrecked me, and I was like
Yeah.
shattered. Like imagine like just 18-year-old kid, and like my dream just
Yeah.
evaporated.
Okay. Yep.
Everything I'd been prepping for years, and so I put the whole rest of the time I was in the Navy. So I got med dropped, of course,
Yep.
and the way it was at the time, I'm not sure if it's still like this, but like the Bureau of Naval Medicine at the time, if you had any kind of cold weather
Yeah.
injury, you basically couldn't be on dive status. You were
Yeah.
viewed as a liability. So I spent the whole rest of my enlistment in the Navy trying to finagle some kind of waiver or
Right.
something
Yep.
so I could go back because that's all I wanted to do. I hated
There.
hated being in the Navy.
A quick timeout is for anybody listening. Heat stroke is one of those few issues that um, they're not going to let you rehab. They're not going to wait on it. You just lost.
Yeah,
Um, so sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, that's the deal in the Navy.
Yeah.
And I was trying to. I spent a couple years on a ship after that. I hated every second of that with every
Oh
fiber of my
yeah.
being.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of, I was like 18, 19, 20, really poopy pants about not being able to do what I wanted to do. And
Hmm.
so eventually I exhausted kind of every avenue I could in the Navy. And then I started talking to the Army towards the end of my enlistment. I was like,
Yeah.
listen, I had this heat stroke thing. Is this going to be, what would this be a problem for? And the Army was like, oh, we don't care. Like you
Uh
can
huh.
have all the heat strokes you want. And I was like, oh, sweet. So I did a blue to green transfer into the Army. And
Yeah.
then I went through the infantry pipeline in the Army, airborne school. Then I went to the selection for Ranger Battalion after airborne,
Yeah.
which
So
was
that's what
called,
I was going to ask. If so, you didn't enlist to Ranger Bat. You had to go and try out for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
So I did the, it was called RIP at the time. So I went through that, did the selection, passed the selection, and then because I was prior service, I basically did like a straight pipeline from RIP to pre-ranger and then to ranger school, because ranger
Yeah.
school is actually different. It's a different thing from ranger battalion selection. Those are two different things. So, but I had to do a whole pipeline in one go, and then I
So
spent
can you be in battalion without having your tab?
you can as a junior enlisted guy. So
Okay.
you have, if
Yeah.
you're like basically anybody in Ranger Battalion who's has any kind of leadership, I'm
Okay. Yeah.
absolutely like corporal and above, you have to have a Ranger tab. So
Okay.
you go to
Yes.
battalion, you can go as like a brand new private out of infantry school.
Yeah.
You can go through selection and go to battalion. You'll do
Yeah.
a deployment with battalion, and then come back and then go to Ranger school and
You're
get
in the
a tab.
pipeline for the tab. Okay.
Sorry, you broke up on that last part.
Oh, I said you're in the pipeline for the tab.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is a requirement though, basically like senior
Yeah.
D4s and that.
That's okay. So I
Yeah.
keep interrupting. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. So yeah, I did all. So I actually had the opportunity to do, like SEAL training and also the Ranger pipeline. I got to kind of see both worlds and do like
Yeah.
both those selections
Okay.
and stuff, um, and also be friends with a lot of uh, Rangers, SF, Delta guys, and also I have friends from the Navy still, guys in SEAL teams too.
Yes.
Uh, so it's a very interesting, like little competitive perspective there.
Oh yeah.
But the general life lessons learned from that and how that applies to like
Yes.
having kids, having a big family, or education. You're talking about these selection processes. How do they do? How do they do selections? How do they uh, you can't train everybody,
Yeah.
to be everything you need them to be. They need to be bringing most of that heat with them when they get
Yeah.
there. And
Yep.
so how do you find that? How do you select that? That's what those trainings are. You're not going to these trainings to like learn how to be GI Joe. You better be on the ball when
Yeah.
you get there, and then they're going to teach you some skills after they
Right.
beat the snot out of you to see if you can handle everything. So, but there's so many different little, uh, like really critical insights into just leadership and skill acquisition and organization and all these things that are applicable to raising kids, to teaching kids, and
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and and like encouraging kids, young kids even,
Yes.
um, into a kind of lifestyle or pedagogical perspective as they're growing up that is like adventure based,
Yeah.
that they're looking at their learning, they're looking at their life uh as kind of like a game, or not
Okay.
a selection makes it sound a little too rugged, but like
Yeah.
what's going to happen today, what challenges are going to be there today, and how do we learn about these challenges, and what
Yes.
kind of processes can we come up with to deal with these challenges, and they're kind of learning how to help them learn to approach life that way, where they're like really
Yes.
reaching out and grabbing it, and that relates a lot to um the agency, where they're taking ownership of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and um, I keep hearing you use the word pedagogical. Dig into that if you would. Where where you're coming from with that, and
Hmm.
if somebody's on the other side, how do you want to understand with that?
Okay. um well, I'm using pedagogical really to refer to the entire um process of raising slash educating young children. um I actually really like the term educate and education in the classical sense, because the Latin word is educare, which means to lead out. So it is basically, as is classically understood, because education is fundamentally self-directed. The role of the educator is the guide, or the one who leads them out. Basically, they're pushing them out the door or a little bit past the boundary, but the student, or the one who's learning, is the one who's going to be doing the learning out there. You're not It's not about handing over a bunch of information, or here's how to do X, Y, and Z, and then like it's not just drilling and making sure they can do that to standard. There's a place for that, but it's primarily about setting the condition and kind of and leading them to that, to where they're the ones that have to do it, to decide to do it. They want to learn something, they want to
Yes.
acquire a skill, because if they
Yes.
don't, they're really, you can like beat it into their head all day, and at the end of the day they're not really going to do it. They might do it long enough to pass a test, and then it's out.
Right.
you know I remember that from when I was a teenager. I've seen that
Hmm.
with my teenagers. That's how humans are. Like, if I don't really care about it, you're not going to get me to care about it. I have to
Yes.
want it. So I can like check the box as long as I need to, but forget it. So, the educator is really just, he's there to, or she is there to, like, to help lead them to the point where they can identify the value in whatever the task or information is for themselves as something that they want, and then
Yes.
help them. And so, and then here's some methods by how you might do this thing, or how you might get this information.
Hmm.
You know, so you like, when a kid wants to, if you give a kid an assignment to do a speech or a written presentation or something, if the point is the speech or the written presentation, there's going to be a lot of feet dragging about that. But if the presentation is something that they are really passionate about, they love this thing, so
Yes.
you can tell, you're gonna get,
Dinosaurs for a 5-year-old.
yeah, you're gonna do a whole PowerPoint presentation for all your brothers and sisters explaining the world of Minecraft. Okay.
Yes.
And
Okay.
you're like, yes, you have to be able to do this well. Now they want to know how to do that well. So now
Okay.
we can explain, here's how you build a PowerPoint. Here's how you do, how are you
Yeah.
going to use notes effectively? How are you going to outline this? How are you going to make sure you don't forget everything? Here's some methods and techniques. And because
Yes.
they want it, they're going to like go down that path and do it. And they're going to collect those things and use them and retain them because they're functional and they're applicable
Right.
to them. It's not just
Yep.
something you are putting on them. Like, here, do this thing. You're giving them tools for them to do what they want to do. So
Yes. They
that's
they it's means to achieving.
right, right. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by pedagogical. I mean educate, but I mean that in the classical sense, where I'm not the one really doing anything in this process. I'm the one setting up and helping. But you're basically an NCO. The privates are going to do everything
Yeah.
at the
Right.
end of the day, but
Yes.
my job is to make sure everything's where it needs to be so they can do it. And if
Yes.
if something can't happen, that's my fault because I didn't set it up properly.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So that leads us into an interesting area within within the circles we travel on X and all that. Where
Mhm.
let's just jump right in. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the military right now? What are your thoughts? Should young men even consider it?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Right.
Um, I don't. I don't actually know a lot.
Okay.
When you say military right now,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like at this exact moment, and I don't know enough about it at this exact moment to have an
Yeah.
opinion. So any opinion I'm going to give is going to be based more on like an aggregate of the last, well, basically since I got out, like the last,
Right.
8 or 10 years
Yeah.
is really what I mean there by now. Um, I would not, if let's say I had a son who wanted to join the military, I would not gainsay them. I wouldn't try to forbid them or anything like that, but I would caution them significantly.
Right.
Um, I wouldn't want that to be a hasty or underthought decision. Um, it's difficult for me because I really loved the military. That's all I
Yes.
ever wanted to
Yep.
do when I was a kid. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for the opportunities I had there, for the experiences I had there. Um, I did 7 deployments, and like it really was like living the dream for me. That so
Yes.
I have such a fondness and like personal connection to it. So I can't even really like crap on it too hard. But there's a lot of nonsense in there too.
There is.
And while I was there, the nature of the nonsense, we'll just say,
Yes.
at the time when I got out of the army in 2013.
Okay.
And right at that time, like the nature of the nonsense was taking a form that I just wasn't personally interested in trying to deal with as like a more senior
Uh-huh.
NCO.
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, okay, it's cool right now, but I'm looking like 3 or 4 years down the road. What is my platoon going to look like potentially? And am I going to
Yes.
be the guy who has to try to manage that? And like, no, I
Because
decided I didn't want
that
to.
that was high time for people that weren't in or are too young to remember that. All of a sudden, you had talk of women going to Ranger School. The Marine Corps had its first non infantry commandant. Uh, what else? Female fighter pilots were already in at that point. They overturned Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was just a lot of changes. Man,
A
I
lot of
mean,
changes.
Obama is he's the easy totem for all that, but
Yeah,
golly, everything over the next 2 decades was what did we just wake up to?
yeah. No, it was you're kind of shielded a little bit in some of those units, like in
Yes.
Ranger Battalion. You
Yep.
have a little bit of offset. So anything crazy that happens, it's not going to happen to you immediately. It's going to be another year or
Right.
two down the road. But I was at the point of like now looking at that year or two down the road, and that was part of the equation. There was other stuff too, like
A
even
hundred percent. Yep.
on the deployments, I was running into stuff with like some of the big army battle space commanders, and they changed the ROEs. It was some really like
Yes.
questionable. I've always been kind of the guy to make us not make us think about stuff, but like I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to ask. I'll be the one who makes everyone mad at me. So like I was that guy in my platoon when they're changing
Yes.
this, and I was like, hold on, like here's the new RIs I'm supposed to sign. This one says that like my first priority is to safeguard the civilians of Afghanistan, and that's not what my first priority actually is, and
Right.
nor is that my enlistment oath. So like this verbiage is
Yes.
problematic here, like things like
Oh
that. And
yeah.
they're like, oh, just sign, you have to sign it, Trumbo. And I'm like, but no, this is important, because like
Oh yeah.
if I am in a situation where I have to make a sudden decision about, and the consequences are going to be the life of my soldier or the life of this Afghan, if that is the choice, like I feel like I have an obligation, and I can't deviate from that obligation. I'm not going to, and I'm not going to like sign my name to that paper that I will.
By
So
the by the end of operations, the ROEs that you were expected to follow, uh, rules of engagement for folks listening, but the ROEs that you were expected to follow immediately brought into question the legitimacy of the operations we were involved in
yeah,
because you were running right up, like you said, to am I protecting Afghan civilians or are we operating in such a fashion that I'm looking out for my soldiers?
right.
Yeah.
And it's a question. It's not that I like have a problem with protecting Afghan civilians, or I'm not going to
Right.
do that. But the question is like, but what am I here to do? And
Yes.
if it becomes a question about my soldiers, like, well, that's not a question for me. That'll never be a question. And it was a lot of things like that were in the mix as well. We were doing night raids a lot and rolling up. We rolled up like a Taliban commander in a province at one point who was connected with somebody, so and so. His brother knew the general or whatever. And so then we did like this whole mission all night, like walked across the mountain range, all the stuff, balled him up, and then he knew somebody, and it was questionable. And so then the next day, this colonel says, "Oh, you have to let him go." So we release him, and it was just things like that were happening more and more frequently. Again, this was back, a few years ago, but still, I was like, "Well, what are we doing here? Why am I leading I'm leading my men through these missions through the mountains at night and potentially into firefights or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
IEDs. Um, like for what purpose? This is
Yep.
it's pawn work for like a geopolitical kind of game that was like just
Yes.
increasingly more and more obviously sketchy and questionable and even goofy. So I was just
Yes.
like, I love it. I love the unit. I love the guys. I love the job. Even I had so much fun doing that, but I just like couldn't square it for the long run. So yeah, if I was talking to a young guy thinking about it now, I would want them to be like cognizant of things like that. I wouldn't say don't
Yeah.
do it, but like be realistic about what you're getting into, what you might be required to do, because once you're in, you don't have a lot of latitude of movement.
Yep.
um, but I had friends who were still in, back during the 2020 thing, who were like, one of the guys was just at my house a couple days ago, and he almost got kicked out because he refused to take something that they
Yep.
wanted him to take. And they were in like a whole legal process of forcing him
Yeah.
out, which basically, because of how slow the Navy works and because of how he
Yes.
kind of waited
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
out and ended up being fine, and he's still in. But it was like, on the table for like 8 months is like whether he was going to be kicked out or not because of that. Like, you don't have a lot of leeway. You kind of have to roll with what the
Right.
directive is. The end. You
Yeah.
know.
Especially when you are active, and especially when it is your first enlistment.
Yeah.
There is nothing there. Uh, you have no power, and so then that gets into, without even getting into that particular vaccination. I mean, that is for the crunchy people or whatever. That
Hmm.
is an issue. You're going to run the gauntlet,
Yeah.
and you are going to get stuck.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how many times with who knows what. So,
Oh, it gets worse.
uh,
So I had that. I have so many like comical horror stories about mostly just it's like mismanagement, like people misplacing files and stuff. Where I had to get like multiple different vaccines of the same thing within like a week of each other because
right.
somebody like crazy stuff. But I had to do all this in the military. Well, then I got out, and it's like worse on the civilian side. So then
Oh
I'm
man,
now deploying with
yeah.
State Department, and I had to go through this crazy bad. I had to get like 20 shots in a day. It was insane. Like everything under the sun. They're like the chicken pox. I'm like, I had chicken pox once too. Oh,
Yep.
you have to get the chicken pox vaccine. I was like, is it in your record? I'm like, no, it's not in my record. I was too. Like,
Right.
you have to get it. So just getting
Yeah.
stuck with everything. It's like, well, do you want the job or don't you? So
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's an interesting question in itself. You know, go down the Ron Paul worst case scenarios, and it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, there is a paycheck element to it, and am I going to provide for my family, or am I going to keep my hand up? And everybody has a different line,
yeah,
uh, but if you're going to go in, enough guys have served and said, ah, let's make sure your eyes are wide open before
right,
you jump in.
yeah. No, I think that's the thing. That's what's important. I wouldn't say don't do it, but know for sure what you're going into and have a good reason for it. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because like you, my that was that was a really good time. It was a really good time. A lot of skills that were learned, and not just the whole military thing, but the idea of, oh, I am capable of some things.
Hmm.
I am capable of learning. I'm capable of performing. I'm capable of leading. Huh. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's keep building on this. And that's for a young man, 18 to 25 or so. He's got to start stacking victories.
oh yeah, it's incredible. That's the thing I love the most about it, and I continuously relate things, even like raising kids and educating. I relate it to that all the time because,
Yeah.
yeah, what especially those
Yep.
selection processes, what they're able to do, the finesse and skill and intensity they're able to do to bring to bear in order to do what they need to do, which is basically weed people out and put people in situations where they have to bring everything they have to the table. because that's
Yeah.
really what they're looking for. And
Yes.
so it's a continuous like buffet of that. Like anything we're doing today, 100 times today, is going to be something that's going to require me to bring everything I've got to the table. And
Yeah.
so to create a world where that's the norm, like we're going to be doing this all day, every day, that's fascinating to me. And for the young guys, what you see, it's reflected in these units that have a more rigorous selection. Any kind of like rigorous
Yes.
selection, it breeds that automatically because you have guys coming into that who have, like you said, a lot of them for the first time, like really doing anything independently in their life, and they're stacking victories and accomplishments of things they never thought they're able to do. You know, probably 3 months
Yes.
ago, that dude had never done a 12-mile ruck. Now he just ran the whole thing in like under
Right.
2.5 hours, and like he's like a god in his mind for a minute, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and of course the cadre is not going to say that, but that guy's
Right.
like, I freaking nailed, I'm not the last guy in the
Yes.
line, or I'm not the one getting
Right.
smoked. Then like, yes, like I'm a stud. And then you go through that, and then by the end when you graduate, and then the cadre does come up and shake your hand, and they're like, yeah, you made it, like you're worthy to like join this brotherhood or wear this, whatever the thing is you're now going to
Yes.
wear.
Whatever the thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a rite of passage, and it's phenomenal to like the young male psychology, and it's phenomenal how good they are, even in the modern military context, how exceptionally good
Yes.
they are at doing that. It's like scientific precision. Um,
When the ice begins to crack around the guys that are training you,
mhm.
and you see that,
Yeah,
and then exactly like you said, when you start connecting that to, oh, that's because of actions I took.
right. And you
It's
realize like you're in the process of moving into the realm where that guy is going to be your peer, and that's why
yes.
the and like if you're a young dude who's never done anything, and you have this like older
Yes.
like consummate warrior standing there, like making you do all this horrible stuff, but like that's what's
Yes.
happening. You're seeing that gradually unfold, where like this guy just like gave me a nod, or
Especially
he like
especially
threatened me
if
for a
it's that
second
guy
and then
you
left me alone.
yes. And if it was that guy that you hated and you were convinced was an absolute
Yes.
ass.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe he's not so
Yeah.
bad.
No. I.
Maybe he knew what was going on.
Yeah. Then you get that like Stockholm syndrome, like, oh, like I hated the whole time. Now like
Yeah,
his
right.
dad,
Maybe that's all
he's
it
so
was. Yeah,
cool.
right. Yes.
No, no,
Man,
I
that's
remember, like I said, what I just turned 18 when I went to Buds, and
uh-huh.
I have clear memory I'll have for my entire life was one of the worst ass chewings I've ever gotten in my life. Um, and it was I think it was like the second or third day of first phase, and there was one
Yes.
of those instructors. We had a couple of them actually, but one of the instructors, the guys who were like the really extra ones, you like, please God, keep them away from me. The other guys
Oh
can,
yeah, yeah.
but we had like several of them, but it was one of those in particular.
Yeah.
And we were in a classroom at the end of the day, which you know how that is. Like when you're totally smoked, and then the last evolution of the day, like 8 o'clock at night, they put you in a classroom for an hour,
Yes.
and it's like good luck staying. You've just been going 110 all day, and so I remember sitting there like furiously fighting to keep my eyes open, and like doing the slow blink, and
Oh
like
yeah,
fighting
right.
it. And I did one, and I was,
Did
the
a little
cadre
bit
was
of a
like
nod.
prowling. I did one nod like that.
Yep.
It was
Uh-huh.
during some senior chief who was like a Vietnam veteran was going,
Uh,
and the one cadre like caught the head nod, and he just
yep.
came up behind me, and he said, "Meet me out on the beach when this is done." And so like we finished up, everyone went back to the barracks,
Oh.
and then I was out there on the beach by myself with my
Uh-huh.
paddle, standing at parade rest, waiting for like 40 minutes. And then he comes driving up the beach in the pickup truck, and he's got the quit bell in the back of the pickup truck, and he pulls it out and puts it on the ground next to me, and he said, like, you could save yourself the next few hours right now if you want to.
Right.
And I was like, no. And I was like, I'm good, chief. And And so he just went to town,
Yep.
and he smoked me up for, I think it was about 2 hours. But the whole time he was, he was just breaking me down. And I've never felt so horrible in my life. Like, no crime I could ever possibly commit was as bad as the
Yes.
disrespect that I showed to that senior chief by nodding off while he was talking, this
Yeah.
like decorated war hero. And I'm an
Yeah.
18-year-old kid who's never done jack. And like, oh man. And I was wanted to, like, I could crawl into a hole and die. I was done.
Yes.
And I'll never forget that. But after that experience, he did
Yes.
still, like, occasionally, he was still a threat, but he didn't really mess with me after that. And it was one of those learning moments that's going to stick in my head forever. I'm like, I will never fall asleep in a classroom when somebody venerable is talking to me, but yeah, it's fascinating how the
And it is a
psychology
question
works.
of, right. And how do you quantify that? How do you say, man, because I'm trying to get to the point, like, if not the military, then what?
Yeah.
You've got a young man that wants to wear, and he's trying to operate. And so if we want to sit back here and say, you shouldn't be doing that, you don't need to be fighting these wars, you don't need to be doing this, at the same time, we can't be saying there's nothing
No.
valuable in it. So it's, how do we replicate something outside of that? Because, man, the experience, I understand the experience you're talking about,
Yeah.
and it's, quantify that. How do we get to a point where, because outside, in what world outside the military, 50-year-old in the same way in the military that's 50 years old, he's ancient.
Yeah.
Like, what, there's around, because once you get past
Right.
45, they're not keeping you
Right.
around. It's so going on, and so I understand people getting frustrated with the military, and I can understand the against it, but I'm a young man who is trying to.
Yeah. No, I think that's really actually like the critical question. Like, it's a critical question, possibly the critical question.
Yeah.
With regard to young men in this generation, because that's I don't have an answer for that, and it always feels disingenuous when I'm talking to young guys and they're like fired up for that, and what I see in them is exactly myself. I see exactly what I was fired up about when I was 18. Like, I want to prove myself. I want to be put through the ringer, and I want to go to war.
Yes.
And that's just like, yep. It didn't matter what the cause or the casus belli was. It's like, no, the experience of war. Like, I need that as a man. And I understand that so viscerally. So, and these young guys are talking to me, and I'm like, like, I'm gonna sort of, on the one hand, try to, like, caution you against it, but I don't have a better answer for them, and that's a shame.
Yep.
Because that really is, it's not just a profound need in like the young masculine psyche, but it's a profound need that is really problematic and detrimental if it's not dealt with, if it's not satisfied. Like, it's a good thing, it's a necessary thing, and there needs to be something for it. And if it's not the military, that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be something for it. There still needs to be something for it. And I don't know. It's anything I've seen that's ever, like, tried to get at that or replicate it. By experience, people will try to substitute, like, experience. By experience, I mean like adrenal experience. Like, you can do something really thrilling, and that will be the same thing. And, like, that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
You can do something really difficult, and that's not the same thing. No, there's something about it that you cannot replicate by trying to like dissect the experience and replicate those aspects of it. And I don't know that anybody has that I know of has really come at that problem and figured it out. Short of I don't know, like kind of Bronze Age pervert, like
Yeah.
piracy type, idea. Like, well, just go to a third world country and raid or something. Like,
Right.
I don't, I don't know of anything like realistic or productive that actually is identifying the heart of what that thing is in the young man's psyche.
There was. I'm gonna spitball here, and there's obvious confirmation bias in where I'm going because or uh, because I do the farm thing now. In the
Mm.
mm, the closest I've come to is farming and is
Mm.
uh, okay. Longer so to truncate my story and not take too long. Uh, let's say
Go
take
ahead.
away the military. Way too many video games as a kid. Just kind of sat around, played video games. Um, my parents attempted to have me do better than that, and I guess ultimately they did. But have those hours back to just mess with old cars and learn basic construct. That would have
Hmm.
saved me a lot of pain. Anyways,
Yeah.
I for various reasons I come out of the military. That's an online conversation, uh, and I was myself into farming, and sort of the two places I'm going with it is cool when you don't grow up in agriculture and one of the old timers in your community says your grass is looking pretty good this year, or
Yeah.
your sheep aren't looking too bad this year. Say, all right, that that's that
Right.
feels pretty good. That one feels pretty good.
Yeah.
And then this this next one is just for laughs. There the the most worried I've ever been. There was one time we'd dropped down into a wadi and we were coming up the other side, and I ended up taking out an IED coming up the other side of the wadi, and we were all good. The gunner was beaten up a little bit, but we were good overall, and we ended up setting up a security cordon, and I'm on the backmost cordon, and I've got dunes 600 meters away. The city's a click and a half away, and I've got dunes out there. And the longer I was back there, the more I knew because we were waiting on that follow on, and nothing nothing came. And the longer I was back
Hmm.
there, I'm like, there's somebody up there, and I'm not
Hmm.
gonna see him. I can't even scope him right now, and he's got a Dragonov up there, and he's gonna pop me, and I'm not
Hmm.
gonna know. And I knew I was gonna die that day. I knew I was, and obviously I didn't. Uh, the close the closest I ever got to that though was on top of the farming thing. I decided I'm gonna learn how to drive horses, and I think part of that was that
Hmm.
adrenaline chasing, like you're talking about. Like you got to
Right.
figure something out. And I had a team of mules take off on me when I was running a sickle bar mower one time,
Right.
and that was a scary one. That was the second most worried I've ever been. And the first one was at post IED, and but that's not really replicable, right?
Yeah.
And
No, it's
that's
not.
and neither of those are talking about that leadership aspect either that you were talking about.
Right.
And I don't.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think a big part of it, as far as like the psychological aspect, um, a big part of it when learning leadership or and the military is basically a big system, and any unit you're in is its own system, and everything then breaks down fractally into microsystems. So at the squad level, your squad has a system,
Yes.
and down to like SOPs and
Yes.
stuff. You know, let me see your C bag. You know, because I know what's supposed to be in there. We got the list. So it's all about managing
Yeah.
these systems and stuff. And so when you're a young guy coming up, you're learning the systems and you're finding the capacity to become more and more effective at what you're doing. They're not your systems. You're learning them,
Yes.
you know, but you're becoming more and more effective by the mastery of these systems that belong to
Yes.
these superior warriors. And then as you become senior or superior warrior, you then become tasked with managing and ultimately crafting or tweaking systems. And so a lot of the kind of like gamification aspect of the psychology, I think, where we derive like so much masculine satisfaction from this is the like developing competency through systems mastery and
Okay.
learning to manage and create systems.
Yes.
And that's like tremendously exciting to
Right.
guys, you know, even if you're not autistic like me, it's still pretty cool. Like we all like doing that,
Yes.
you know, and so that's what you do in the military. And but the stakes are so high. So like when you do that well, it gives you such an edge. And it's so sharp in the military because you're like if we master this freaking battle drill, we can like outmaneuver and win every time. It doesn't matter, you know, as long as our enemy doesn't like massively outnumber
Yes.
us, we got them, you know. And so
When,
there's like a
when,
competency
yeah.
that is born from
Yes.
this and the iteration of this. And so like that you can replicate that, or you can like you can get like a lot of that
Yes.
in any something like farming, which is the same kind of thing when you're coming into that. Like I'm not a farmer really, but I know it
Yeah.
works like this. When you're coming into it not being brought up in that way, you're learning a bunch of systems which are not your
Yes.
systems. It's the old timers telling you like that ain't gonna work, you
Right.
know, and you can choose not to listen to them, and then you'll be a dumb private and all your sheep are gonna
Yes.
die, you know. And so you learn the systems, and then they become your systems, and then you can master them, and you can find competency from that, and then you can like tweak the systems to improve them, and you're like leveling up. And then when you like to really achieve is when you step into the zone of like creating whole new systems like outside the box. I'm putting something together, you know, like I don't know, like a Joel Salatin kind of approach. Like I'm gonna
Yes.
like
Yes.
rewire this
Yes.
whole freaking the whole freaking idea
Yeah.
here and do it this way. And that's where failure comes in when you're stepping out of an established system. You know this SOP works. That's why it's an
Yes.
SOP, and you're now gonna like but based on the principles at play here, I think I can apply it like this. And that is exciting. It's dangerous. The stakes are
Yes.
high. It's like financial stakes then, but it's the same process happening. And if you pull it off, you've now moved into like, you know, you're now like a tier one
So
guy. Like I'm the guy who came up with this sweet system that now everyone else is looking at like, oh, look how he does it. That's cool. You know?
that 5 minutes ago when I said when an old timer comes and says, "Huh, your grass looks good this year," that that farmer, this is my experience. I come in with Joel Salatin and regenerative agriculture and all that, and he's laughing at me 5 years before he makes this comment about my grass, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, dude," because I wound up on his property and we're talking about different stuff, and he's like, "All right," he's been over at my house, and he's like, "Yeah, you're crazy. You think you're gonna stock that much cattle?" And I'm
Right.
just over here doing the Salatin thing, rotating my sheep or whatever. So when that man
Yeah.
says he wasn't eating crow, it wasn't anything. It was just him saying, "Huh, all right,
Yeah. Good
yeah,
job.
good job." That was so huge for me. That was like, all
Hmm.
right,
Yeah.
I'm doing something.
No, I get it. That's
Yep.
right.
Oh man, very good. Hey, all right, so chill for a minute. Where can people find you? What are you accomplishing right now? You've had different Kickstarters going. You're doing the school.
Hmm.
Just go on a tangent right now. How people can support you, how they can find what you're doing.
Okay. So my at the moment I only have an Etsy shop. Um, it's Tamburn Bindery, two words, Tamburn Bindery on Etsy. That's where I have products, any products for sale. I do 1 to 2 publishing projects a year, and I've been using Kickstarter to like fund those projects. So what I have at the moment is a live project which was successfully funded to do a Old Norse version of the Poetic Edda, and I'm basically doing kind of like a whole Germanic lore theme with that, because the one I did last year, Beowulf, and Illuminated Beowulf, that's also a part of this as well, and they're both available through that. So I am at the tail end of the work on that project. I'm going to have it ready to send to the printers in the next probably 2 weeks. So you can go to Kickstarter to the Poetic Edda project, and if you go to my X page, all the links and stuff are pinned on there. And there's a pre-order page on my Kickstarter. You can get any of the books, any of the products and stuff for that project. And that will be kind of coming together and starting to go out towards the end of the summer. So that's my big project for the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. And little housekeeping, I got to get the description and the video and the stream set up, and so I'll be linking to all of that. Yeah, I'm good on my end. Anything you want to finish with?
No, man, I really enjoyed
This
the
is
talk. It was
great.
cool.
All right.
A lot of fun.
Well, that's it, guys. We're gonna log off, and we'll talk to you later.
All right.